Hello everyone, welcome to our first panel. Hope you are as excited as I am. So now we are discussing leadership phenotypes. We have Anna Gould, the Director of Strategy and Operations at Merck Healthcare KJAA. Julie Kim, the President of U.S. Business Unit and U.S. Country Head at Takeda. Dame Kate Bingham, Managing Partner at SV Health Investors. And Dr. Alexandra Zemp, McKinsey and Company Partner. Welcome. Enjoy. So for this session, we are doing a little bit different with the questions. So we are using this app or site. So please scan it with your phone. It's called Mentimeter. The code is here.
You can't see it.
You can see it? Can everyone see it? Okay.
Hold on, should we just get
Take
everyone
your
take
time.
a photo? Can you see it?
But do it fast, please. Thank you, Kate. Everyone managed? Yeah? No? No? Okay. Take your time, but not so much.
It's gone. Is that right?
Okay. Everyone good? The code is 53447077. Okay, good. Okay, let's start. Thank you, everyone.
Great, so good morning, everybody. I hope you've all had some coffee and are feeling bright and awake and ready for an interesting discussion this morning. So my name is Anna Gould. My role is at Merck, KGaA, the German Merck. And I'm in a strategy and operations role in our oncology development unit. And apart from my role at Merck, I also have quite some history with Global Biotech Revolution. I was actually a participant, a leader of tomorrow at the very first GAP Summit held in 2014 here at the University of Cambridge, and then have been involved in the organising team ever since then, including in the president role from 2017 to 2021 before handing over to Yannis and Adelina. So the purpose of our panel this morning is to not talk at you or not give no slides, nothing like this. We'd really like to have a conversation with you and to have a discussion. So please engage and think about your questions, and we'll try and spend as much time as we can towards the end of the panel in a Q&A. What we'll do is we'll spend the first maybe 30 minutes or so, and we'll start by having a conversation together to just see the discussion and to throw some ideas out there for you to react to. But during that time, please think about your questions and be ready to throw those at our panelists during the Q&A section. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this topic as well. So the topic of our panel, the first panel for this session, is about leadership phenotypes. So different styles of leadership, different leadership behaviours. And there are different kinds of leaders. There's no right or wrong. There's just different. People have different personalities and different things drive them. Someone might be, wonderful at inspiration or visionary leadership, but maybe they're not the best at sort of getting into the operational details, or maybe someone's really great at building a team and motivating them, but they're not the best at driving financial results. So there's many different phenotypes or styles of leadership. And as well as different styles, there's also a question of where those styles are best suited. So, different leadership phenotypes might be suited better towards different specific environments than others, and that's something we'll talk about as well. We've got speakers here who've got very different and diverse experiences in different kinds of organisations, so we'll talk a little bit about different kinds of leadership and where they're best fitted. Maybe a visionary leader might feel a bit restricted in middle management in a corporate environment, for example, and might be a bit better suited to a startup, for example, things like this. When you're at the start of your career, and I can definitely say it has been like this for me, it can be a little bit hard sometimes to reflect and to really know what your own personal style is or what drives you and where you might fit. And that's what we'd like to hopefully help you with a little bit in the course of our discussion this morning. Why is this important? 2 reasons. Firstly, for driving success. You know, I came across an interesting quote when I was preparing for this panel, that there are many more good ideas than good leaders in the world. And I think there is some truth to this idea. And, you know, indeed, the key to success for a company can often maybe lie even more in the strength of its leadership than, you know, the products or the ideas that it's developing. And I would say especially for smaller stage companies, where the effects of leadership can be even more immediate on the success of the company. Secondly, it's important to think about this because, you know, for your own happiness and finding the environment where you're best set up to thrive and which speaks most to your personal drivers and values and strengths. So, our goals for the panel this morning will be to talk about different leadership styles and phenotypes. What are they and what kinds of jobs or organisations are those best suited to? To help you to self-reflect, so to help you a little bit in your journey of thinking about these things and what drives you and could be a good fit for you. And then maybe a little bit to challenge the mindset that a leader is a big boss, you know, a CEO, and maybe more towards thinking that, you know, success or leadership is finding congruence between your drivers and your values and an environment which plays to those strengths. So that's what we'll talk about. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speakers or invite them to introduce themselves. And as well as sharing, you know, their name and their role, I'd like to invite them as well to sort of already get into the topic a little bit. And when they introduce themselves, to speak a little bit to what their experiences have been with leadership so far in their career and what their leadership styles are. So perhaps I might hand to Julie to kick off.
Thank you, Anna. So hello, everyone. Julie Kim. I work for Takeda. Those of you who may not be familiar with Takeda, it is a Japanese pharma company, but it is now global in scale. So we have half of our business in the US, and that's the region that I'm responsible for. And we focus in 4 primary therapeutic areas: in GI, neuroscience, gastroenterology, oncology, 5, and rare diseases. We have rare diseases throughout all, so it always confuses people. I've spent roughly 30 years in the healthcare life science space. I started in consulting, but then moved into industry. I've lived in the US. My accent, you can tell that I've lived in the US for quite a long time. I've worked here in the UK, lived here for 3 years. I also lived in Switzerland for almost 6 years, worked in many countries around the world. At last count, I think it was somewhere close to 60 different countries that I've worked in. Ooh. Not lived in, worked in. So quite a bit of global experience. I've worked in many different functions within a pharma company. So I've not had a traditional career in terms of going straight up, for example, the sales and marketing ladder or straight up one of the other functional ladders. I've done a lot of what you call a lattice career, not a ladder career. Now, in terms of leadership style, oftentimes people will describe leaders like this. The leader's on the top and the team and the organization is below. My leadership style is like this. I partner, I listen, I collaborate, I focus on trying to understand what motivates teams, organizations, and trying to unleash that potential, whether it's an individual, a team, or an organization. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Kate.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I'm at the other end of the scale. So I'm a venture capitalist, invest in biotech, been also doing it for a little over 30 years. And so what we do is we raise money, we build companies, we find other companies that have already been built to invest in, we recruit teams, we support the programs, identify the right resource allocation to prioritize the different opportunities we have. We do partnerships, we ultimately need to realize our investments because that's what we are, we're fundamentally investors. And we might do that by taking companies public, we might sell them, we might sell programs along the way. So Takeda bought one of my companies, which ended up in the drug Entyvio, really successful GI.
It's our biggest
drug.
one.
Biggest one, I didn't know, yeah. So that is my role, and like all venture capitalists, we are all ADHD, so everything needs to happen yesterday, and we are impatient and we need to get on because We have fixed term funds, so they're 10-year funds, but every day we waste, you're not building and you're not moving. So and it's a very small, nimble organisation, generally, sort of venture capitalists as well as small biotechs. So we will recruit the same sort of people, whether it's pharma or biotech. The difference is the way you make decisions so that we can pivot quickly, but we don't have the funds and the depth of expertise. These guys won't be able to pivot so quickly, but when they hit a bump, they will deal with bumps generally better than we will, especially later stages, manufacturing, regulatory, large clinical trials, those sorts of things where breadth and experience and depth really matters. And then I had, in 2020, a 6-month secondment into government. So it's the complete opposite of all this venture capital expertise, where I led the UK Vaccine Task Force. And so my job, as instructed by Boris, was to secure vaccines for the UK, secure vaccines for the rest of the world to make sure that all those who needed vaccines were able to receive them, and to put in place plans to make the UK more resilient for future pandemics. So we just raised a new venture capital fund. So I said, well, I could only do it for 6 months because I had a day job and I had a whole bunch of investors who were expecting us to invest their money. So we agreed 6 months and I extended it actually to the end of the year, so May through December 2020. We hit goal 1, so we clearly did secure vaccines for the UK, and we were the first country in the world to start vaccinating its population. And by April, all those who were vulnerable in the UK were vaccinated. We did have the ability to support goal number 2, which was vaccines for 2, for all those people who need it globally. But lots of political decisions meant that I don't think we were as effective as we could have been. Having said that, the Oxford vaccine that was partnered with AstraZeneca, according to The Economist, did save more lives than any other vaccine in the world. And they manufactured more vaccine in 21 than anybody. So actually that was a huge contribution, but I think we could have done more. And then in terms of pandemic planning, I would say it's a beta at best in terms of how our plans have been executed. So I've gone, my bulk of my career is in little biotechs working with building companies and investing in them. And then I went to the exact opposite extreme of a massively hierarchical organisation. I was reporting to the Prime Minister with a team that basically expects you to perform like this, even though, of course, everything I've been used to has been flat. And we did it all remotely. So I was stuck in Mid Wales for 6 months. Well, no, for a year, but during 6 months while I was doing the pandemic stuff. And so that was a very interesting test of how do you actually build teams and get people to actually work well together when you're physically never, ever meeting them. Over to you.
Super. Alexandra, pleasure to meet you all. Very happy to be here today. So partner at McKinsey and Company, perhaps like one sentence about it, right? It's a large management consultancy firm. Largest partnership actually in the world, and what I'm focusing on within McKinsey is really kind of life sciences, and within life sciences actually mostly biotech and smaller pharma companies, but I come back to that in a second. So perhaps why talk about management consultancy? Because I think probably what Julie and Kate shared are probably much closer to what many of you are thinking about as a career, right? Going directly in the STEM field, life sciences, doing what's close to your heart, right? Like, why did I go to McKinsey at the time was I was always super eager to learn, and I was always eager to see new things in my life. And to be honest, after my studies, I just didn't have a clue about what I wanted to do. So actually McKinsey at the time for me personally was the best exit of that question, because I was like, look, I'm going to do McKinsey for 2 to 3 years, see a bit of different companies and figure out what I want to do. And I actually enjoyed it so much, and instead of the 2 to 3 years, by now it's 12 years at McKinsey, and I'm still there. And even with McKinsey, I really evolved a lot, but always focused for me personally on the learning element that was important to me. I started a lot of work with big pharma at the time. When I started at McKinsey, actually a few of my first projects were actually together with Matthias, whom we had as a speaker before. So we spent my early time, a lot of things together. And then over the time at McKinsey, I realized, like, look, I actually enjoy much more building companies, working with younger companies, and probably a bit also less about the big company politics. So these days I'm working a lot with like smaller companies, a lot with biotech companies that are growing, some of them preclinical, some of them clinical, some of them later stage. And I think that's what I actually personally enjoy most and learned that I enjoy most. It's kind of this space, right? If you ask me about my personal leadership style, what I would probably say is I learned that, I would say when I started my career, I was like probably perceived a lot as an introvert by people, and everybody was like, oh, you're an introvert, you need to speak up more, you're so silent in these meetings, and so on. And for me, actually, over time, it actually became really and evolved as a strength, because what people describe me probably today and as my leadership style is that I'm an extreme good listener, listening to people, and rather than just kind of talking and acting before listening, but then also being very approachable because people recognize that I listen. And then actually using that moment of approachability and listening to really debottleneck problems and help people kind of solve the problems, right? Being it on my day-to-day teams that I work with at McKinsey, or then also with my clients, I think it's actually the same world in some ways. And it's just a huge joy, I would say, the opportunity I had so far to develop my career. I would say, as opposed to Jolie, who said like she did like a lot of lateral moves, I probably did a pretty linear move with a McKinsey, just working the ranks from consultant to partner, but then more chose the topics that I work on the way.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And very diverse experience, but also styles, as you can already maybe sense a little bit. And I think we picked up on a little bit as we met ahead of this panel. So looking forward to your questions. So to kick off, let's talk a little bit about leadership phenotypes and styles. And to get the conversation started, we'd like to already go to you. So if you can open Menti, we'll ask the first question to you, which is, if you were to name a leader that you would admire, who would you name? Who comes to your mind when you think of a leader who inspires you?
Obama comes up big.
Yeah. Very interesting. Any reactions so far?
Well, it's nice to see the diversity of the types of, whether it's your mom or Obama, Genghis Khan. I would put my mom up there too.
Yes. We've got both Jacinda Ardern and Julia Gillard represented. Future version of myself. Great answer. Very interesting to see what comes to people's minds when you think of a leader. I think it's lovely to see that a few people have put their mum or their stepdad. But you do also have some typical names that I would have expected to come up, right? You've got Nelson and Mandela, Obama and Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs, and of course, Elon. So yeah, any thoughts from the...
Putin.
Any thoughts from the panelists here? Who would you name here? And for you, what would you say? What is a leader to you?
So I was making that side comment. I would also put my mom up there, but I would also put Ruth Bader Ginsburg up there as well, for me personally. But to your question about a leader, I'm sure you've all read this in some book or another. You can define a leader as being a leader of yourself, and that is something that everyone can do. You can all be strong leaders of yourself. And so if you are not, that's the first thing that you should work on, right? Then there's being a leader of a team, whether small or big, and then leader of an organization. So I think there's different ways to think about leadership. But first and foremost, you need to be a strong leader of yourself.
Kate, Alexandra?
I mean, I've got an example, here in Cambridge, which is Pascal Sorio, who runs AstraZeneca. So I think it's an astonishing story. So anybody, and you look on your phones and just look up the AstraZeneca share price. And so when he joined, they were facing a massive patent cliff, as many pharma companies were. And they had a hostile bid to take them over from Pfizer. And Pascal stood up and said, not only is AstraZeneca currently undervalued, but I'm going to turn it into a company that's going to be this valuation, this level of sales, and we're going to completely restructure and revitalise this company, which had been quite sort of introverted in terms of style, based in Cheshire, sort of, outside Manchester, and we're going to move it to Cambridge, and we're going to inject energy and really bring dynamism and growth. And not only did he do that, across 10 years, but he did it early. And to have that confidence, the vision, to bring people with him, to take really big strategic decisions, I think is very, very classy. So he would be my one example of a great leader.
I mean, for me, probably, if I take all the names, right, what I'm also thinking of, for me, it's like often an element around having a purpose and want to change something, or just do something good that you're convinced about, right? That's why I actually love my mother, my grandparents, my stepdad, and all these elements out there. I would also sometimes think about my sister, right, who's just a teacher in high school. I think she actually shows leadership every day, right, in very extreme forms, because she kind of manages a class of 30 students in every moment, and kind of try to help them to get kind of a successful degree at high school and prepare them for their future career, right? So I'm actually thinking about these as, there's more to say, there's great leadership probably in any moment. I think what I'm always reflecting on is, for me, it's like the best thing is if you take some risks, you're comfortable to take some risks and step out a bit out the comfort zone. Because I think also all of you, right, you have great degrees, great background. It's always easy to take the simple route in things that kind of are on the way. But I think for me, great leadership actually comes a bit with like taking risk and stepping out of that a bit.
And if I can just add on that, because one of the things that I was quite pleased when we walked into the room is this is quite a diverse audience, and that is nice to see. In our fields, if you were to look at it today, it doesn't look like this room. I hope in the future, with individuals like yourself, that it will look more like this room, but it does not today. And so that is another aspect of being a leader, is when you are the one of something in a room, or the few of something in a room, there's also a lot more responsibility. So you can choose to not step up and take on that burden, or you can choose to do so and do so proudly. And I think that is one of the things that you need to think about depending on what type of career you want to take, because you may be entering a field where people don't look like you. And that does create different types of expectations and a different type of leadership that sometimes is required. I'm sure there's lots of stories that we can tell you about how difficult that can be sometimes, but overcoming that and setting that example for others to follow and making it easy for them to follow is also how you can lead.
Wonderful. So when you were starting out in your career, what did you associate with the idea of success and leadership? What did that picture look like in your mind at that time? And has that changed at all since then?
So I worked briefly in consulting before going to business school, and then I've been in the same job ever since, with the exception of the little secondment. My view of success when I was starting out was to be autonomous and be able to control whatever decisions and business I was in. So obviously I wanted to end up running something, but I certainly didn't have any expectations that was anything big. It needed to be something where I could get up and know that I could have influence and control over what I did. And I wanted to do something that I cared about. And that didn't mean working in lots of industries. It meant actually what I wanted to do was to develop drugs, because I studied biochemistry and I was at the early stages of the sort of whole biotech sector, so that we understood more about disease-causing biology. Actually, the bulk of the drugs that were being developed at the time were to basically address symptoms and not address the underlying cause of disease. And I was gobsmacked when I was reading then about how we knew about the causes of cystic fibrosis, for example. We knew it was mutations in the chlorodyne channel, but there were no drugs to address it. And it just seemed completely crazy. How come we know what we need to solve, and yet we can't do it? And so my view was I wanted to be in that space, and I wanted to contribute in some way to generally getting better drugs for people, given that most diseases then, and certainly still now, are not cured. And so for me, it was all about doing something I really cared about, and also having some level of autonomy and authority so that I could actually deliver what it was, as opposed to being a cog in a chain, in a wheel.
You had already quite a reflected view at the time, because for me it was like when I started my career, it was probably the CEO of the big pharma companies, which was like the leader, and like, okay, what do I want to do in my career? I want to be up there, that's the greatest. They really have achieved something. I think then when I saw how they operate, saw more the day-to-day life, and then saw also smaller companies, right? My reflection has become much more like, look, I purely admire what the people of these big companies are driving and changing and doing, right? It's an incredibly hard job. But I also think there are many, many other great leaders out there. If I think about the biotech companies that I'm working with, right, some of them having like 20 employees, 10 employees, and then like up to the thousands, right? But I think if I take them, I actually admire those as leaders even more, because they live, of course, in a much riskier environment.
We're
right?
almost always going bankrupt. That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
We're running out of money.
Exactly. You're always almost going bankrupt. You have an asset that's failing, and then you're like, oh, hell, what do I do now, right? So actually the risk that they are doing, and at the same time trying to bring something to patients that is actually really changing a paradigm, is actually for me even more impressive as a leadership style. And that is not just the leadership team, right? But it's actually everybody who is brave and actually takes that risk, right, of working in a company where you never know whether it's tomorrow bankrupt, as you were saying.
I mean, look, I think both of you had better thinking around that than I did coming out of university. So, my parents were doctors. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, so I started pre-med, didn't like it, thought I was going to be a lawyer, interned at a law firm, didn't like it, ended up in healthcare consulting because I wanted to do something in the healthcare space, but being a doctor wasn't for me. So defining success in school, it's about your grades. Right? Your success is driven by what's your GPA? Where are you in your class ranking, if those things matter to you? And most people in school, it defines success to some degree. So when I went into the working world, there are no grades anymore per se, but there were performance reviews. Promotions were the closest thing, in my mind, to getting good grades. So that's how I defined success early in my career. It's like, okay, how many promotions will it take to get to a particular level? Or how long will it take to the next promotion? Ooh, she started at the same time I did, and she got promoted a month earlier. Right? And that was how I defined success. And I looked at people who got promoted faster as leaders. It took me a little while to figure out there's much more to life than that. There's much more to success in a career than just promotions and who's making it to the top of a ladder. And so over time, that definition has shifted. And so today, I mean, I don't know that, I guess I could be promoted to
Hope
CEO.
so.
Still working on that one. But it's not about promotions anymore. It's not about me anymore. Success at some point in the career, early on, it was all about me. What am I getting recognized for? What am I getting done? How many things can I demonstrate that I did? But at a certain point in your career, you realize it's no longer about you. It's about, okay, can you develop a team? Can you get a whole group to deliver a result? How can you get a whole organization to achieve something, to strive towards the purpose of the company. And that's how I define success today. And as I said, there are leaders all throughout the organization, whether they're an individual contributor or a manager of a large team. If they are all helping to drive to that purpose, then they are being successful and they are being leaders. So that's the evolution of my very unenlightened thinking at the beginning of my career to, well, you guys will have to determine whether it's enlightened or not, but the way that I think about it today.
I can absolutely relate to what you've described and that evolution of thinking. And I'm wondering as well as evolving your thinking about what success and leadership looks like, evolving your own self, right? So coming back to this idea of leadership phenotypes and your own leadership styles, as you've grown in your careers, has your leadership style changed, or have you built on your own natural style to sort of add additional capabilities in your arsenal as leaders? Is that something you've worked on?
So for me, not really. I think I'm just much too, this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to do it and, get out of my way. So I had to obviously be a bit more diplomatic when I was in government. But the good news is that, if you ask a venture capitalist to do something, they're going to do it through a venture capitalist lens, which means you're getting on with it and you're setting goals, you're figuring out what the obstacles are, you've got incomplete information, you want to hire the best team that possible, bring all the experience you can to bear to deal with whatever the problem is. And the good news was the instruction I had from Boris was, you've got to do this quickly. So that was an incredible tick from my perspective. And reporting to the top in a very hierarchical organisation also enables you to work more quickly than you need. And so actually, from a leadership style perspective, people said, did I reflect on it at the time? And the answer is absolutely not. We basically had to make sure that we brought the right people in to deliver what we needed to do. So then I think there was 194 different potential vaccines. So I needed somebody that was going to work out which ones we wanted to really prioritise and bring into a portfolio, recognising that the chances of any of these vaccines working was not high. I needed somebody that would sort out that even if the vaccine worked, how would you manufacture it? So there's a whole supply chain, which was ultimately much harder than the actual clinical side. And then I needed somebody that would help think about clinical trials and regulatory and how were you actually going to get the regulatory approvals so that you could get vaccines into arms really quickly. And so for me, thinking about how do you build a team to deliver an objective very quickly, it's about defining the goals, bringing in the right skills, setting objectives along the way. Because right at the beginning, when we were having our Zoom calls or Teams calls, because government says Zoom isn't secure enough, we would have calls at 8 o'clock in the morning, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And by putting some structure in what was a highly unstructured task, actually started helping and having then key people that were clearly empowered to deal with the different aspects of what we were doing, actually made things work so that as soon as we made a little bit of progress on manufacturing, then we could update the group and say, right, this is what we're doing. And as soon as we started, we went from 194 to 20. That was, again, progress, and we could start putting structure around what it was we were doing. And so for me, leadership is about getting people who are much smarter, who absolutely know what they're doing and allowing them to get on with it, but working in a structure which is collaborative and communicative so that it's not a sort of empire and I'll only tell you, what I'm doing when I've got to the end, but a open, transparent, these are all the problems we're facing. This is what we're doing about it, but I'm going to need some help here. And for me, the best teams are ones that are absolutely eyes on the prize. They know what it is they need to achieve. We'll ask for help. We'll make sure they bring in the right skills. We'll recognise the risks. We'll be open about what the risks are. But keep driving. Just sleep. Don't sleep really. 24/7 and just keep going. So that is the leadership style if you're going to be a venture capitalist.
I would actually say I evolve my leadership all the time. It's probably even hard to pinpoint, Anna, to be honest, like what changed, because it's like kind of such a fluent change. Probably the one thing that I would say I had to learn more is a bit what I would call diplomacy. because I was also very open, always sharing my mind, sharing feedback, sharing perspectives with everybody, right? If they would ask me for an opinion, they would get an honest opinion. And I learned that that doesn't work with everybody the way you want it to work. So I think I moderated that a bit and really learned on being more careful and what I tell whom, but at the same time not giving up on it, right? There's still people sometimes, because I give them honest feedback, they don't speak for me for 2 weeks, right? Because they say like, look, what you said was completely unfair, and then they reflect and realize. But that is probably a part that I really had to learn, because I was just sometimes too outspoken on my opinion. And it had a risk of breaking bridges if doing that.
Yeah, I would say for me it's also a constant journey, a constant evolution, and the key is to stay open to feedback, stay open to learning. If you're not, you cannot improve, you can't do better. So, from a personality standpoint, on the introvert-extrovert scale, I'm a very deep introvert. But most people that I meet in the work environment, they're very surprised when I say that, because I have a lot of learned behaviors over many, many years of trial and error and figuring out how to do things in a way that still feels like me, but displaying, let's say, the behaviors that are required in different types of leadership roles. So whether it's, as I mentioned, I manage the US, so we have a variety of different sales teams, and sometimes I have to come and speak to our sales teams. So if I just speak in my normal quiet manner and just, hey, give them a talk, that's not going to motivate them. That's not going to inspire them. So I have to figure out how to do this, but still be me. So I'm not going to be up there telling jokes, doing rah-rah stuff. That is not me either. I'm horrible at telling jokes, and I can't do the rah-rah thing. It just looks fake, and it would fall flat. So I find ways to inspire, talking about the future, talking about opportunity, talking about growth, that can still do what I need to do as a leader of this large organization, but do it in a way that suits me. I also, don't necessarily fit the mold. When I started in my career, I would wear navy blue suits with a white blouse, or a black suit with a white blouse, and I had short hair, and it was straight, and it was always perfect, and da-da-da-da. There was a way that you had to look to be a leader as well. After you get comfortable in your skin, I wear what I want. I look how I want. If people don't like it, too bad. This is me. You get the whole package, and that's just part of how I choose to lead. And that difference, things like walking to work. People are like, oh my God, you walk to work? Well, why not? Like, you don't have a fancy car? Like, no, I didn't buy a car when I moved to Boston. I was living in Zurich before. Public transportation is fantastic, right? So I moved to Boston. Public transportation is not fantastic.
You got blue bikes, though.
We do have blue bikes, but the most dependable thing are my feet. So all these different aspects, and you see up here 3 very different types of leaders. It is good for people to see different ways of leading, so that you don't feel that you have to fit a particular mold to be successful and to be a leader. Because leadership and success can look so different today. And I think that's part of I'll call it the beauty of what you have in front of you, is that you don't have to fit into one of the 3 molds that existed, at least when I started in the corporate world. And I knew that I could never fit those molds. And so I never tried to aspire at the beginning of my career for those top roles, because it didn't look like me. It didn't feel like me. But over time, you now have different choices. So I think it's a constant evolving process, and the key is to stay open to feedback and to keep learning and growing.
Fascinating answers, but interesting to hear that you've all somehow come to this idea of coming to know yourself and just being fine with that, and the rest of the world can somehow take you as you are. So we've talked about what is a leader, what are some different styles of leadership, and how those ideas can evolve and change. And now I think it would be good to talk just briefly, because we want to get to Q&A quite soon, I think, so let's speed through a little bit, but fit, right? And you spoke to this a little bit already, Julie. Given who you are and what your natural style is, what's going to be maybe the best fit for you and how to think about that? So I'd like to invite you to get out your phones again. We'll ask our second question just to get a sense of who's in the room and what your interests are. So question being, what kind of organisation do you see yourself working in? So it could be pharma or startup, academia, different things. So who have we got in the room? Oh,
Kate, a marketing event.
You're going to get a lot of,
No. Okay, we get
you're getting a lot of CVs coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you started off great now.
Consulting, yeah, no, I'm behind now.
yeah.
But I actually like the high fraction of startup, actually.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start there? So, Kate and Alexandra as well. From your experience working with startups, what kind of leadership styles or phenotypes are often successful in those kinds of environments, or maybe not?
So for my companies, which are literally the other end of yours, so we'll start with a clean sheet of paper and we'll go up to, probably my biggest company might have 100 people, so it's small. The sorts of leadership styles that really matter are people who are completely committed to what it is the company's trying to achieve, super flexible about how they work. So, we're not big enough to be able to say, well, actually, my job is only this. And if somebody needs to, lean in and help somebody else in protein engineering or in doing a business development pitch or doing whatever, that level of flexibility really, really matters and help. Deep expertise really helps. So, again, this is not a place that, startups generally are not a place to sort of work your way up through an organisation which will give you deep training at every level, because by and large you have to do it on the job, and it's of course there will be training, there will be some level of support, but it's not if your phone's broken, you're going to have to fix it yourself. You can't call the IT department by and large. So that level of sort of flexibility, nimbleness, collaborative support, because you don't have big enough resources to be able to rely on big corporate departments, is something that's important, and being flexible in thinking. So again, if you hired only first-class degree graduates from Cambridge, all of whom have studied the same thing, actually you're not going to get that diversity of thought and challenge and interesting approaches and ways to solve problems. Because in my companies, every single company will be hitting problems all the time, because that's what happens. And the successful ones are the ones that will navigate the bumps as they go along. And so you can have fantastic technology but crappy management and you will fail. You can have brilliant management team and hopeless technology. They will find a way to actually turn something into a success. So it's that nimbleness and breadth and diversity. And so for me, we have to have diverse leadership teams. We have to have diversity throughout the companies. We have to have diverse boards. And I'm a broken record on the topic. And it's actually Europe. We're much better than I think the equivalent in the US. So I think that openness is important. Now, if you want in a startup to have a clear certainty about what you're going to be doing every day, it's not for you. If you're worried about long-term security and how you're going to, have 8 houses and a lot of mortgages, it's not for you. Because when our companies fail, we turn the lights off. We'll obviously do absolutely everything we can, but that is the nature of what we do. And it's unlike big organisations where if your particular project doesn't perform, you'll be, provided you've done a good job, you'll be rotated onto a different area. Whereas in our companies, it doesn't matter if you've done a really, really good job. If the company fundamentally fails, you're out of a job. So you have to be willing to take risk in the sorts of organisations we support, and you will be rewarded for it if it's successful. So that my job as a venture capitalist, we raise funds which are 10-year funds. We put up a material part of the funds out of our own cash into those funds, so that as far as our investors are concerned, we have very material skin in the game, which is a way to make sure we're all aligned. But the way we get compensated is once we've returned all the money that the investors have committed to our fund, we then get a 20% share of any gains above that. So that means we are only rewarded if our funds perform and if our investors make money. But of course, these take a really, really long time. And if we can't persuade investors to give us funds to invest, we're out of business. So our entire reason for being has to depend on actual performance, which is a very, very focused way of living your life. Because if your companies don't grow and become successful, and you're not able to exit those investments, you won't raise any more money, and therefore you're out of a job. So it is the ultimate sort of merit-based job, high risk, but whether it's venture or biotech, startups, it's all quite intermeshed. But you can do very well if you perform, but you will do very badly if you don't.
So we have about 25 minutes left, and I'd like to spend as much of that on Q&A as possible. But quickly, Alex and Julie, what kind of leadership styles thrive in a pharma environment and in strategy consulting, or the different kinds of organizations that you work with? I don't know if you would like to start, Julie?
Well, let me start. I think for me, on consulting, for me, it was always the eagerness to learn, right? I think you will be exposed to very different problems, very different challenges every day, a lot of things, particularly if people start like out of the comfort zone on how things are done. But I think this kind of eagerness to learn, and I would say the other side, like acceptance of feedback, right? And kind of willingness to learn and kind of grow and evolve, I think is for me the core thing for being successful in consulting. Then of course I would assume you're all smart and kind of have a great degree that you can bring in, right? But I think based on your background, kind of this learning willingness for me is the big thing, right? And I would kind of add one part on what Kate was saying on the biotech side. For me, it's also an element of, you mentioned it a bit, like this ability to deal with ambiguity, right? Because there's a lot of uncertainty. And then there's something that's similar between consulting, I find, and biotech, is you just need to be a doer, right? I mean, don't wait for people to give you the answer and give you a recipe on how to do things. But you actually need to learn as you do things. And this can be quite uncomfortable if you're waiting for a recipe that people give you to act on.
I would say there are lots of things that you need, regardless of what type of organization that you're in, that Alexandra and Kate have mentioned. I would say one thing that you have to be conscious of if you're working in a large pharmaceutical organization is that there are constraints, whether they're regulatory constraints or other, let's say, corporate governance type of constraints. So you have to be conscious of what those constraints are and learn how to succeed within those constraints. You can't just decide to do something on your own per se. So that's a big difference. So Takeda is not one of the largest. We have 50,000 employees. There's lots of different frameworks that we have to look at depending on which country we're talking about and where we're operating in which space. So in the UK, you've got the pharma code. You've also got what MHRA says and the whole legal framework. But because we're a Japanese company, there's also some Japanese governance that overlays that, and plus the US government likes to put their fingers everywhere, it doesn't matter. So we also have to be concerned about what the US government, the Department of Justice, anti-corruption, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these things that are in place that you cannot ignore and that you have to learn to operate within. And also as a large company, you've got lots of people who are responsible for different things, which is the opposite of what Kate is talking about. So it is important to collaborate. It doesn't mean that I can't do something that may impact what Kate's function is doing, but if I do it on my own without asking Kate or involving Kate, then that creates all sorts of other challenges. So there's just a lot more, I would say, collaboration that needs to occur within the constraints that exist that you have to operate in. But other than that, many of the leadership traits that you need are similar, and fundamentally, you have to have resilience in today's environment, because even for big pharma companies, yes, we can weather some storms better because of our size and whatnot, but at your individual level, you're always going to have challenges, no matter what career you choose. And that resilience, and you've heard it in different ways through what both Kate and Alexandra have said, that's something that you have to build. And you have to have a whole lot of resilience to carry you through your career.
Great. Well, we've talked a lot. Now it would be great to hear from you. So let's go to questions. Hands up. Wait for a mic to come to you. And then if you've got a question, just say your name and where you're from. And then if you'd like to direct your question to anyone in particular, please let us know as well. Right. Who would like to start? Feel free. Yeah, sure.
My name is Om Rangacharya, and thank you so much for this informative session and motivating us. So my question is, what do you think in the biotechnology sector in R&D, which leadership style is more sustainable, collaborative leadership style or the individual brilliance?
Well, that's easy. Collaborative every day of the week. Because again, biotech companies, even a big one, has to rely on collaboration across every single thing that they do. So I don't think there's any such thing as an individual leader without collaboration in our sector. Do you agree?
I would fully agree. I mean, to your earlier, I think you made that earlier comment about someone can have a brilliant idea, but if they can't work with the individuals around them, that idea won't succeed. So you do need to have that spark of idea, but fundamentally that collaborative nature is what's going to bring success.
But when it comes to invent new things, as Nikola Tesla said, my secret of invention is being alone. And introverts are great at being alone. So I think being an introvert is also an advantage. And individual brilliance is also good for research and development. Not for
Not for long, actually.
Being brilliant is important,
Yeah.
I would say, on the R&D side, but it is not sufficient.
Oh,
Okay?
yeah, right.
So it's not sufficient. It is a necessary ingredient, but it's not sufficient for success.
Okay.
I would though add there may be some like edgy, brilliant people who just like doing like one specific thing extremely well. They still have a collaborative angle, right? You still need to integrate somehow in the team. But I think if they're like some of edgy scientists that are running around in a company, they can actually make the results also quite much better. But I think it's like single individuals, and then you still need to be able to collaborate in a team, right?
Right, next question. Maybe we can take one from this side of the room. Yeah, feel free. Over here, yeah.
Thank you very much for the conversation. I'm Christopher from Argentina, by the way. So I was going to address this question to you, Kate, but I will extend it to all three. I think it applies. So I'm fighting myself in my head about doing a PhD or not. And I've got too many ideas on what to make it about. But the question is, I identify more as a generalist in that sense. Like I'd rather be like a leader putting bright people together than actually focusing on one specific topic. So my question is, how do you see necessary or not to have a PhD to, for example, being in a startup, in the very early days of a startup, and then the extension goes to consulting and pharma in general from a leadership position?
So it depends what job you want to do, but generally I think having a PhD is a good thing because it gives you an area of deeper expertise than you would have if you just had an undergrad degree. Now, it's not critical if you're going to go into a non-science-based job, but again, if I look at business development, corporate development, people with PhDs will be stronger performers because of their background than if they don't have that. So generally, my bias would be go and get that degree.
I mean, if you want to work in our labs or any pharma company or biotech on the lab side, PhD will be helpful. You can eventually learn, but it'll take you much longer. Right? If you want to be, so when you say general, that can mean a lot of different things. So on the business side, PhD, not necessary per se.
I would agree. On the business side, it's not per se needed. And I think there are different paths, right? And then I would also say the world is not linear, right? As you was also saying, like, look, you could say you start something and then you go back to a PhD and go back to business, right? There are also different paths you could take. So it also doesn't need to be the linear route.
My husband is 55 and he's just started his PhD at King's College.
Great, more questions. Yeah?
Hello, my name is Magda, and I'm from Warsaw, Poland. I'm very interested into one of the topics that you, Kate, and Julie touched a little bit, because having a leadership style is always associated with some kind of development, and this development is also associated to building up your own resilience. And I'm very curious, do you have any experiences, do you have any advices how to cope with this huge amount of responsibility that is carried by the good leaders and people who are responsible for big groups of people?
So, I'm sorry, you're asking about advice for someone who's leading a large group of people?
I'm asking what would be your advice on how to take care of this part of your own mental development in becoming a leader?
Okay. So look, I'll give you a thought, and if this isn't the direction that you want to go in, just reframe it. So we all tend to operate in a zone that we are comfortable in. Mm-hmm. Part of building that resilience and building new skills and continuing to focus on your development is pushing yourself a little bit out. So that doesn't mean you have to take a huge leap. Sometimes people do, but the way that I did it was always, okay, so there's something that I need to work on, and so I push myself a little bit, and you keep figuring out, and then you find, okay, your zone of comfort has now increased a little bit. So now I'm going to try this thing over here, and then I push a little bit over here. Oftentimes, if you try to do too many things all at once, it's huge stress, the bigger chance for failure, and if you're doing all sorts of things, it's harder to figure out what's working. So my advice is to pick just a couple of things at a time. Push yourself. When you get comfortable, go to the next thing. Push yourself. And then the next thing.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you have different thoughts?
Perhaps for me, another element is just also understand, like, if you are in a tough situation, right? Figure out, like, what actually gives you energy and helps you in a tough situation, right? Is it just chatting to a friend? Do you have, like, a mentor or a sponsor that you can talk to who can help you kind of deal with the situation? What I learned for myself in many situations where I get, like, extremely stressed and I'm thinking about, oh my God, like, how do I handle all of this? This is so difficult. I'm sometimes just reflecting on, okay, what's the worst thing that can really happen if this now goes wrong? And in many cases where you're, like, super stressed about a situation, there's actually not so many things that can go so extremely wrong. So it actually helps me sometimes to just kind of take the step back and realize, like, yes, it's a stress level for me right now, but in reality, I think there's many solutions to it.
And also, just don't take things too personally. I mean, I'll have plenty of companies that will hit the buffers and they will fail. And, if you had a mental breakdown every time one of your companies fails, you shouldn't be in this business. So you've just got to learn to have a sort of titanium skin and recognize there will be failures, and it's not necessarily your fault, and it may be something that you could have averted, or maybe you can't, and you're just going to have to deal with it. But also be explicit and work with the companies to say, this is what we're aiming to achieve. We will have some clear sort of gating decision points to get you there. But if we're not making progress, we need to have that grown-up conversation to say, this isn't working, let's figure out how we can do it. And if it doesn't work and it fails, then so be it. We've all put our best foot forward and tried to make it work. So getting too traumatized every time you fail is not a good thing.
Right, another question? Great, up the back.
Hello, I'm Michaela. So I it's like a two-part question, but they basically lead to the same thing, all surrounding leadership styles. So at your level, like, I especially appreciated Julie with saying that, as a leader, you're kind of wanting to be at the same level so that you feel more like a team with whoever you are leading. But at your level, I mean, all of you are essentially leaders of leaders. And so then in your roles, you have a lot of input and say about how you train the future leaders, not just of your organization, but others that go other places. So then in that, like, building your teams and managing those teams, how do you incorporate leadership styles into those conversations with other people to train them to be better leaders. Because, I mean, in my own personal experience, not everyone understands that everyone can learn and teach in different styles, and that no way is good or bad. It's just you have to embody that style. And then the second part is that, and I guess this would be more centered for Kate, with working a little bit more in like public policy and the public sector as well. So I've noticed as well that there's some different personalities between like biotech industry, academia, policy and government. Like I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and so I've worked with some like NIH directors and people at those levels, and they certainly have different like personalities than a lot of the people that we're meeting here today. So then how would you work with their leadership style to be like still very much respectful, but understand that you both can benefit from having a collaborative like partnership with them?
Well, my 6-month experience in government was all about setting objectives and a very clear set of goals about as to what we were to achieve. So after being in the post for about a month, I then set out wrote a presentation and said, these are the 6 goals, I think, within the 3 buckets that Boris had set me. This is what I think we should be able to achieve. And then behind each goal, I would have quantified measures to say, have we actually achieved that goal or not? And what I found in government is they had literally no idea what to do with it. Because they said, you know, why have you given me this? And I said, well, I'm here for 6 months and I want you to be able to mark my homework at the end of it to say, have we done a good job or not? And the difference in style in government versus venture is, for government, it's all about the way you do things and are you following the correct procedures and are you making sure that no one will ever criticise you for the way you've gone about it because you've thought about everything in the proper way. Whereas my view, with having no experience of government, actually I think was a positive, because I could come in and say, right, if you want me to do this, then this is what we're going to need to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how you're going to measure or not whether or not we've done it. Now, we weren't doing anything in terms of the processes in which decisions were made that was actually any different from normal. So the ministers took spending decisions, the civil servants made sure it was all kosher and legal, and we were the external advisors to make the specific recommendations. But we just did it 10 times faster than it would have been done had it been left to the way they normally do things. So, I mean, I think that you say, you know, how do you make sure that we sort of aligned with the way of doing things? The answer is we didn't. We basically said, if you want to achieve these goals, you're going to have to speed up the way you work. And of course, as a venture capitalist, I wanted it to work like a VC. So we have investment committees, and our investment committees will take proposals, and at that investment committee, they will make a decision. The answer might be, yes, we will invest, no, we won't invest, or we need to see this additional data before we're willing to make a decision. And it's not sequential, and it doesn't take forever, and we need quick decisions because it may be competitive or time sensitive. And that's something that government doesn't really do. And so I think if I had a magic wand, I would implement a way more of a venture capital mindset in government than the way it works right now, because it's just too slow. And that's not good for anybody, and it's not technical. So, you know, if you're going to make decisions about complex technical matters, you need to have people that actually understand what it is you're doing, and that is not the case. Now, it may well be true in NIH, and you've got different things, but again, Warp Speed was not different in style from what we were doing over here. Slightly more, I mean, again, brilliant people within that team, slightly more structured, actually, in terms of what they were trying to achieve, versus because we're smaller, we had to be more flexible about how we work with people. But actually, again, it was taken out of the normal structures and empowered to get on and do things. And in a way, in a perfect world, you shouldn't have to have separate structures to do things that government should be able to do anyway. And so I think it's less about how do we work with them. I think it's more how do they adapt to work in a fast-paced, technologically rich environment.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. So one of the things that Kate mentioned is important for your first question too, and that's setting the right goals, right? And so whether you're an individual leader of a team or a leader of multiple leaders, part of the the skill set is, have you set the right goal? Because if you set goals that are too low, or they're not concrete enough, or whatever, you can't move the team or the organization. So there is skill in setting the right types of goals. So that's one. The second thing is that regardless of, whether it's government or, I've had a few exposure on the U.S. side as well, and it's mostly 22 to 26-year-olds who are running the U.S. government, to be quite honest. You go to meet with a senator, you go to meet with a senator, and it's their aides who know all the research and who are doing everything, and they just brief their senators, and the world moves on, right? So you've got a lot of power in that regard. So set the goals, try to take the time to really understand the other individual's point of view, because if you can figure out their pain points, what is causing them the most concern and stress, and address that, you will unlock all sorts of things. But if you don't bother to try to learn that, and you just push your agenda, you're going to keep hitting that brick wall, and you won't get anywhere.
Right, we have time for, I think, one more question.
Hi, my name is Heer. I'm from Boston. Thank you so much for this. I do want to do a quick shout out to the team. This is wonderful to see all women panel with women leading 3 different areas of biotech. So it's very inspiring on top of the content. I have a question that touched upon something that I think all of you spoke about, which was evolving leadership and really just getting inspired by people you work with, learning and listening, and having a community of sponsors or like a board of advisors that, like it was mentioned before. If you could reflect on what you did in your journey that was helpful in this, like how would you recommend people who are in the early stages of their career be intentional about like building a titanium skin or actually having some of these skills, like growing this? In terms of leadership, I feel like we don't have a lot of resources that actively require us to reflect on our behaviors or think about it till we get to a mid-career stage. And at that point, a lot of things are already hardwired. So any recommendations on that would be super helpful.
Perhaps I start with like a quick view, right? And for sure there are many other angles you could take, but for me it's like an element around reflecting on what your strengths are and what you're good in, right? I think that's one thing you have a good view on today. I think the other part, and that I find even more important, is like what are you actually excited and passionate about, right? And ideally you have a bit of this overlap on where your strengths meet your passion, and that's kind of where you can really kind of find your career path, or you kind of move towards more, how can I bring my strength into my passion, right? But I think that's for me the part that is extremely important, because you can always like career optimize, and then you do something that you don't enjoy. And the reality is, from what I've seen, like the people that are great leaders, they do things that they fundamentally enjoy and have a passion for and want to drive forward. I think that's for me the most important thing.
So I got 3 answers. The first is try new things and don't be afraid to fail, because when we've gone through our careers and where we've ended up, people aren't saying, they've done a really good job because they got straight A's at A-level and they've done this and they've checked all these, CV boxes. They've done a good job because they've addressed challenges, they've hit obstacles, and they've found ways, even when they're facing failure, and they may fail, but they've acted appropriately and they've learned something from their failure. So the whole aspect of failure is something that you need to embrace. And I've learned way more about the companies that fail and the programs that fail and the wrong people that I've hired, the ways I've financed the companies wrong, the boards that I've put together that are terrible, all the things that have gone wrong, you learn from. And that is something that's really important and makes you strong. So then the second thing is do something that you really care about. And it's got to be something that you wake up in the morning and you just think, I'm excited to go to work and to do whatever job it is, because something I'm proud of and something I want to tell my grandchildren about and something that I really care about. And then the last thing is work hard, because you're the only person that's going to make sure that you can achieve what it is you're going to do. And so don't be afraid to fail. find something, keep trying things until you find something you like, and then get your head down.
Yeah, I'd say all great advice, so I won't repeat that. The only thing that I would add is to observe, right? As you're early in your career, observe. The benefit that you have is that you've got a lot of different types of leaders that you can look at today versus, at least when I started out, there weren't that many different types of leaders to look at. Observe. See the things that you like, see the things that you don't like. Make a note, try out the things that you like, figure out your way of doing it, and you can keep adding to that. So it's one of the things that concerns me actually with so much remote work ongoing. It's much harder. If all you see is this part of me on a screen for 20 minutes, you're not going to learn as much as if we're interacting in person. So I do think that's a challenge for those earlier in their careers. If you don't physically interact with people, it's much harder to learn.
Thank you so much. That's great advice.
Thank you. I would add as well from my side, be open-minded about where you can learn. Don't only think about your job and your career or your studies. I learned so much through my journey working with Global Biotech Revolution and in the role as a president about leadership and what works and what doesn't, that I didn't have the opportunity to learn yet in my actual job. So think about your environment and your ecosystem and what you can join or what you can start. There's other places that you can learn apart from your actual immediate role as well. Wonderful. I think we are out of time. So thank you so much for your wonderful questions and thank you to the panel.